Like I say, my biggest concern right now is with current ongoing issues. It's not with any of these potential issues that I guess you could say I've become somewhat disenchanted with this whole process. And even though, I think it's inevitable that we resolve all the issues that I can, I'm a little more hesitant now than I was in the beginning to talk about things because I feel like I talked about some things without thinking through possible outcomes that information could be used for, and just being, overwhelmed at the time with the whole situation from my end. Not really overwhelmed anymore, kind of settled into the good life of jail, so.
Not too boring for you?
It's like mandatory boredom.
Well, that's one area where we might be able to help you with is that
right.
As we move along with some of these things, at least we're all working on something.
Yeah, I know. But that, I'm still concerned about the long term from my perspective.
And what's the concern? Tell me what your concern is.
My concern is it's twofold, really. There's two different ways it can go. I can go for maximum publicity with the information that I have, or I can try and go for minimum publicity. And I'm including, all the issues in that statement. My issue right now is I don't know which way it's going to go. There's a aspect of this to where I would prefer to keep it all minimum publicity, but to a certain extent, it's already too late to do that. Granted, lately there hasn't been much publicity, which has been good. It's given me some time to consider that option, but that being said, not all these issues are resolved yet, so I don't know how much publicity there's going to be for them. So it's it would be premature for me to give out any more information with the hope of keeping it minimum publicity if in the end result there's going to be certain other issues that come out anyway.
Sounds like you're undecided about this.
I am, just because of a personal conflict I have with from my own personal perspective, I don't mind the publicity, but there's other factors involved too. So.
And concerned about Lainey and
right.
Anyone other than her that you're concerned about?
Not as much anymore, but yeah, there are some peripheral concerns. That's,
What about your family? Do they pretty much know what's going on? I mean, is this going to come as a shock to them, or do they already kind of know that?
I don't know. Initially, I was thinking, being in their position, they're going to, even as technologically backwards as some portions of my family are, eventually they would come to terms with the reality of me being in the situation I'm in, and they would seek out that information for themselves and kind of draw their own conclusions. Even though the press releases have been limited, there's still enough information in them to deduct and draw some conclusions that the stuff didn't come out of thin air kind of thing. So that's another issue that I have right now, is because I don't know. I know some of them are, when certain people have known me, are still definitely in denial about the whole thing, and
Or do you try to set them straight about your
Well, that's
life of crime?
that's the issue. That's confusion I have right now, because I've never told any of them since this whole thing started that, oh, I'm innocent. I haven't come out and said, oh, I did this. I have mostly kept my statements about the whole situation very vague, under the guise of, well, I can't say anything, but at the same time, like, kind of draw your own conclusions sort of thing.
Well, when it comes to these other criminal activity, obviously, I mean, we know about the couriers, and we know a lot of things. Is there something that we can do to facilitate you communicating with your family, or I mean, is there if that's important to you, for them to know before it hits the papers?
There may come a time shortly when I have to make a decision on which route I'm going to go, whether I go for maximum publicity or minimum publicity. And of course, if I come to the conclusion that I'm going for maximum publicity, then I'm going to tell them about it first.
Right.
In which case, there are possibly some things that could be done
To arrange that, facilitate it.
Right.
What would cause you to go the maximum publicity route?
If I were to come to the realization that for a couple different things. For one, if I was to come to the realization that minimum publicity wasn't going to be an option. I think you all know me well enough to know that I'm not, as far as me personally, I'm not that conflicted about the whole situation.
Right.
Therefore, all that remains in my mind, from my perspective, is to see which way it plays out.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think part of us, all of us, know that the cow has left the barn, long ago, right? That
Right.
to some extent, no matter what any of us do, it's already out there. So there is that consideration. Obviously, we've, offered to do things in certain ways to limit publicity, and I think in a large extent we've been pretty successful about that. But some of this is out of our control.
Right, and I understand that now. That's the biggest issue that I was naive on initially, is what the options were for limiting the amount of information that gets out. I'm a little better informed at this point as to what's ultimately going to be known by the general public. So, and I'm also, I'm a little more adapted to my current living situation. So, become a little more realistic about, well, if this is the way it's going to be, then I'm the one in jail, so I should use whatever I have to benefit my own situation. And because the bottom line is, now that I'm in jail, everybody on the outside, regardless of how traumatic this may be for them, it's essentially over.
And we know you don't. I mean, you've told us that this is not a concern of yours, but it's not over for a whole bunch of others.
I'm just saying, as far as physical threat is concerned, it's over. The damage is done. Whatever damage is done is already done. So.
How does it impact your cooperation on other crimes, whether that's you decide maximum publicity or minimum publicity? I mean, if it was maximum publicity, how would you proceed in continuing to give us information, and as opposed to if it was minimum publicity, just so we can understand that.
Well, that hinges on another issue for me, which is essentially how long am I willing to sit in jail? Regardless of how much entertainment value I get out of any of this, my perspective on sitting in jail indefinitely hasn't really changed. It's I guess you could say I haven't discovered a new clique of friends in jail, and I don't expect that I will anytime soon, so I don't really see a long-term interest in survival living there. With that being said, I'm more realistic about the situation being that it is. They watch me like a hawk. They're going to keep me, in my own separate cell indefinitely, probably. So, that's hinges directly on the realization that if I'm going to be in this situation, then I should use, what information I have as entertainment for me. And that's where the maximum publicity issue comes in.